Hey, Justin.
Hello.
So loud.
I see Gus there too.
He is here. Here's Duncan. Hello, Duncan.
Hey, Duncan.
We have Travis's in here, but I can.
Hey, Gus. How are you? And for all intents and purposes, you should be at the table. I know this is a procedural thing, but you should be at the table. I know that's a day or two difference, but this is yeah. Anyways,
Thank you for coming. Okay. Thanks. Hi, Travis.
hey, Travis.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Howdy.
Just got some introductory business to do, and then we'll toss it over to you. But I believe we have everyone accounted for except for Paul and Alex, but I'm not sure. Alex, you can join. Okay. All right, ready?
Welcome to the September 9th, 2024 meeting of the Mobility Planning and Coordination Committee. As a reminder, this meeting is being broadcast to the town's YouTube channel and also via Zoom, and is being recorded for publication, later viewing, and administrative purposes. I haven't been notified by anybody else here that they are recording the meeting. And if you are, just notify the chair. Take a roll call. Chair Tim Bolger is present. Duncan Allen.
Present.
James Goldstein.
Here.
Mo Handel.
Here.
Justin McCullen.
Present.
Paul Volta is not present. Tyler Gabrielski
President.
and Karis Lustig.
She's got.
She nodded.
She's there.
Oh, yeah.
The first order of business is to approve the minutes from August 12th, 2024. Has everyone had a chance to review them? Any questions, comments?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay, so we'll take a roll call vote. Chair votes aye. Duncan,
Aye.
James,
Aye.
Mo,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
the minutes are approved. And then the next one is, so welcome back, Travis. Gonna give us an update on the transportation draft scope, and thank you for coming.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. So, to give you an update on what we've been doing since I last met with the committee, we've developed the scope of work based upon the inputs we've received from you all and from the work we've done elsewhere. And just to provide another background, the scope of work that we're developing is for what we call street design and policy guide, and it forms the basis. The idea is that it will provide a transportation plan or a policy plan for the town, as well as a street design guideline for the town and for future capital and planning purposes. So based upon what we, since May, what I've done is I've done a little bit more research on the scopes of the previous projects, or excuse me, similar projects both in Newton and then across the country, and looking at some others and finding out a little bit more about what they did and the scope of work. And then I put together a scope of work, which I sent to Tyler. And basically that scope has 5 major tasks. One is to develop the guide purpose, the goals, and the policies Number two is then to look at the existing conditions and existing policies that the town has. Those be hand in hand done together, the way I see it. That as the town as the consultant would look at the existing conditions and what the town has done previously and has done to date, work with the town to then develop the policy, the purpose of the policy, what those policies are and what the metrics would be. Task 3 would then to take that information and do the functional classification design elements. That would really be a lot of the meat of the report or of the document, and it would be a living document that the town could update as it goes along. And then task 4 is concurrent with the other tasks. It's the engagement tasks, working with doing like this committee, as well as working with the town select board, and then the public at large. And then 5 is the deliverables of the policy guide, as for both a version of the guide the town could work with as a living document, a version that would live online, including a geographic information system mapping version of one that would be easily able to see what streets there are and what the classifications are. And based upon that scope of work, begin to look at what I think the price would be, and developing a budget and then a timeline of. I was thinking probably somewhere around 9 months, trying to keep this running at a good clip, perhaps like 9 to 10 months. And that's where we are in terms of the scope of work. So with that, I'll stop here and ask to see if anyone has any questions before I give more detail.
Thanks, Travis. Task 3, just a question. There's not a lot of detail here. It's quite broad, and I'm wondering if this is enough for a consultant. Will they have a good idea of all the design elements that you or we have in mind? And I'm wondering if that should be more detailed, both in terms of perhaps examples of design elements, examples of street classifications, or is this so well understood in this world that it's not necessary? The reason I ask is a consultant could do this at a very high level and meet the scope of work, but not meet our needs.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I certainly could. I think we could go back and look at that and see if we want to add some additional detail and maybe even cite some of the examples from Newton. It's a fair point. Let me look that. I'd be happy to look back at that and see if we want to add that. I think from my days as when I put on my consultant hat, if I used to be a consultant, I think a little bit more detail probably would be could help here a little bit.
I'll jump in and say that certainly could be helpful. I'm kind of in the same, but I've been a consultant most of my career, and it's not unusual to see a scope like this. By the way, this is not something that would raise my eyebrows if it came across my desk as a consultant. But what I tend to do in responding to that is actually have a very substantive scope of work, focusing on deliverables and methodology, which sometimes bores people to tears. I find, avoids embarrassing misunderstandings somewhere downstream. And I'm wondering if and maybe a way of thinking about that as well is sort of saying, what do we anticipate our evaluation to consist of? Are we going to ask them to actually talk about what their methods would be? And how do we need to get any more specific about the deliverables?
Duncan, so one thing to note is that the scope will be incorporated into a RFP by the town, and the town has a particular methodology for evaluating proposals.
Okay.
So that's kind of more on the procurement side of things, in terms of how they'll be evaluated.
Okay, could I maybe ask for a little clarification on that? I mean, sometimes that means, there are 16 forms you fill out to make sure you're, got an appropriate number of left-handed people on staff or what have
Yeah.
you. And,
Uh,
lots and lots of regs, do this, understand this, swear to this, fill out this form, all of which is well and good. But the question becomes, how do you know that you're getting what you're trying to buy? And
Yes.
that's where, is there a technical dimension to the evaluation? My very first project at one job was to evaluate proposals with a 1,500 point evaluation scheme developed literally by a NASA rocket scientist who is my boss. And he just dumped, 1.5 foot of 3-ring binders in my desk and said, okay, next week you have to have your forms filled out for the 1,500 points. And I'm not saying we need anything like that, but I mean, the question
Yeah.
really kind of is, if the rating is entirely, do you comply with the town's requirements, which they need to do, but also people find, fairly easy to do. The question would be, are we looking for good thinking or good methodology or anything of that nature in a way that we could use to discriminate the preferred bidder?
Yeah, so there are two kind of halves, two sides of the coin when it comes to RFPs. One is the side that you mentioned, which is, does the firm meet the sort of technical qualifications on paper? That's the stuff where, it's basically going to be, are they capable of doing the job as described? The other side of the coin is a qualitative evaluation. And that usually involves an interview process. I've been a part of several of those myself. Like we did recently for parking service vendor. So usually they'll have a representative come in or a team and give a presentation to us to a selection committee. And that will involve, Q&A and sort of the more qualitative questions about their approach, about their references, times in which they've performed similar services for other municipalities. So it's not just sort of like, are they technically qualified on paper, but there'll be evaluation in that way as well.
Is there a universe preferred providers? I know on some bids, there's a group that we deal with typically.
Pre-qualified, you mean?
Yes. Do we know who that group is for this?
So the DPW has pre-qualified transportation engineers, but that list is a little bit more on the design side and a little bit more on the sort of traffic study side of things. This is kind of a different slice of the pie that I think we would be looking at a different group. I think we would start by looking at who did other examples of these street design guides or master plans for other communities, approach them. Similar to how we did with the micro mobility study that we did last year. So we do have some firms that they do transportation policy related services, but I think that we would be seeking some new blood on that front.
Thank you.
Just another question in the scope. Do we need to identify the non-vehicle trails, what's in, what's out for the consultant? I mean, there's all kinds of trails around town, and I'm assuming we're only talking about those. Well, I shouldn't assume. I'm not sure. And if I was a consultant, I would want to know that. So I don't know if there's a way to identify those up front and make it clear to the consultant what those trails are. And I'm also assuming we're including municipal roads and state roads. Is that true? And if not, should we be clear about that?
So do you mean like,
Like 135? I mean, that's
Right.
in,
yeah,
but
so that's municipally controlled infrastructure. So that, yeah, I think that would just be a matter of making that clear. I guess just generally, it's a question of how prescriptive do we want to be in the scope in terms of these streets are the ones you're going to be looking at, or these trails or whatever. I think the trails is probably a good idea just because that's something that's maybe the consultant wouldn't think of if we didn't point it out specifically. I think that by referencing some of the other street design guides, that would be a really good baseline for the consultant to figure out what it is that we want. But it might make sense to have a higher level sort of break, doesn't have to be exhaustive, but just sort of like, these are the categories we're looking for. And then examples of how we would like it to be broken down, you know, something like that. I don't think it needs to be too comprehensive, but
Too comprehensive here or too comprehensive when we go to the next level with the?
here,
Okay.
when we actually do the work, of course, we're gonna be, you know, we're gonna be thorough and look through everything with a detailed eye, but I think the idea, the most important goal we're trying to accomplish with the scope is make sure that the consultant knows what the product is that we're looking for, right? So it goes a long way if we're like, here are some examples, and they can look through them and see, okay, this is how they broke it down. And then they work with us, you know, obviously it's a back and forth. We work with them collaboratively to hammer out, once they are selected, what exactly we want on a granular basis, but there's probably some more detail we can add just in the functional classifications and design elements. We can give like some examples of how we think it might be categorized, like arterial collector, what have you. And then, you know, as an example, you know, these are the types of pieces of information we'd be looking for each of those. I think that's probably as deep as we need to get.
Because we're gonna be doing that again with the next consultant, right? Talking about more specifics. Like,
When we select them.
right,
Yeah,
yeah. So it doesn't necessarily need to be like really specific here in this scope, right?
I mean, ultimately, once a consultant is selected, their proposal and the scope that they define as amended, I guess, in negotiations for the contract is going to be what they fulfill. And so ultimately, we want to make sure it's clear.
yeah,
And includes what we want included.
yeah.
And on the trails, is this committee clear on what trails are in? I'm not.
Yeah, actually, that's what I was gonna say. When you talk about trails, what do you mean? Because it's a
Well, it's in
definition.
the scope, and that's the question.
Right.
What
So
trails?
what
I mean,
trails are
At a
you?
minimum, I would think that the rail trail is in. And extensions of the rail trail that are, being looked at, the Community Way and the extension to Chestnut. To me, those should be in. Beyond that, I'm unclear, but that's why I raised the question.
Yeah, so I mean, the scope is asking for classification and recommended treatments for existing infrastructure. So it's not prescribing project locations and projects
Right.
that are not existing already. So obviously the rail trail is a big component of that. I think that the rail trail would kind of be the model on which we base how we would treat trails generally through this guide.
Well,
I think it's worth specifying the rail trail extension to Chestnut. Within any bidder that we push out for as something to evaluate, because I think that is that is something that is a central, I think. That's something that I think that would be transformational for the town to be able to, then take the rail trail to be able to end that within urban center, by junction. That is something that I think perhaps we can put in an RFP. I don't know what additional, you say trails, I don't know what else you're talking
So
about.
what context do you mean? Because they're not going to be designing any features of infrastructure that is not yet built.
No, sure, but at least have that in the context of a plan that this RFP is going out to do is because it is an important, potentially important conduit for multimodal transportation through the town. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they needed to do the design and construction designs and all that. I'm not, but nonetheless, that is something that should be on the mind when an RFP goes out for a town-wide plan, which is what I believe that's what we're trying to put out for.
Garrett's.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think what I'm hearing is that we want it to be factored in as part of the pedestrian and biking component that's going to be addressed as part of the transportation guideline. And I think that may be the context for which it makes sense. I think I'm not aware. There are a few areas in town that I'm aware of that have trail is not the right word, but small pass-through features that are in the public way that are really pedestrian oriented. So that are
That's a
used
good
quite
way
a
to
bit
say
for like walking routes, or they're public ways, but they're small, they're only for pedestrians, but they do have connectivity components to them that really aren't addressed in most of our documentation. We don't have them as our sidewalk network, they're not roads. So when I think about that, I think about those, like, what are those connection points? The rail trail being one of the big obvious ones, but I think there are lots of little ones that I can think of, a couple. The one at the end of it's not George Agate, but it connects Webster from where Norfolk is. There's a small right of way, and there's another one that we just were reached out to about. So there are a few of these within the town that connect roads through an area that you would not necessarily know you have the ability, unless you're sort of from the neighborhood, to know how to connect through those areas. So I think we're talking about connectivity components for ped and bike as opposed to just for vehicles.
And I think that the goal of the design guide is that there will be, how are we going to design trails? There, they'll be 10 feet wide minimum. If it's for pedestrians and bikes separated with the yellow line. I think that's what the design guide is for, so that that's applied when we go to maybe do a rail trail extension. Those are the design guides that we've said, if there's an off-street trail that we're going to build, it's going to be to these specifications. I think that's what the design guide figures. How we're
I
getting.
agree, Tim. Yeah.
Look,
No, back there.
I'd like to just latch on to something that Justin said. And he gave one example, which is the connectivity to Chestnut. Concept of multimodal, I think needs to be preserved. Not just for that, but if it ever occurs for other opportunities. There should be some evaluation of how the modes affect each other. And we may want to start thinking about that in future planning. And so if we can build that into this, I think that would be good.
And getting back to the trails, and I'm sorry to keep at this, but I'm not sure that the rail trail is a model for the trails. Because the ones that Karis was mentioning are not, 8 feet, 10 feet. I mean, they're pathways and pedestrian only, although you could probably, get a bike through, but they're not made for that. And so to me, that's not part of the scope, but that's just my own thinking. And I think we need to make a decision. Are they in the scope or not? Or are we talking about a very limited number of non-vehicular paths or trails.
I think the rail trail, like. If you imagine Dedham Avenue compared to Trout Pond Lane residential street. Is to the rail trail is to these smaller, like, obviously not every trail is gonna have all the same features, but there's gonna be levels within that category, that slice. Of, okay, this is a full-blown multimodal trail, it's got all these features in it, and then that's one category, and there's sort of subcategories within that will touch on the smaller pieces of connectivity that Karis was mentioning. That's what I meant to say. Not that we were gonna apply like every trail is gonna look like the rail trail, but just in the sense of that's the starting point, and then we go from there.
And we do want another category or two of smaller pathways, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
I think the off-street trails, it maybe ends up, I don't know what it will look like at the end, but maybe end up its own, category, right? And there's, if we have the opportunity to do rails and trails, they're 10 feet wide.
Right.
If it's a small neighborhood connecting path, which would probably be in the trail, that would be, maybe 6 feet wide or.
Right. Do the other examples, Minneapolis and Newton and so
Minneapolis.
forth, they have these other categories of trails? Okay,
Yes.
good.
I think Minneapolis separates it whenever it's either a bike or pedestrian piece of infrastructure that doesn't really necessarily touch a road. So, like a bike lane on the side of the road is gonna be significantly different than a bike lane on the rail trail, in the woods, and so those are
Okay.
handled separately. But I think that that's why we included it here, kind of the same way that Minneapolis had it.
yeah, so I guess my question spinning out of that conversation is, do we want to be specific in terms of, okay, these are the buckets we want you to put everything in? Is that something that we do now, or is that something we do during the process when we're actually working on the project, Because that's how specific are you gonna get versus leaving it somewhat broad so that the actual format of the guide would be developed during the project?
I raised the question, so I'll give a quick response. I don't think it should be dictated to the consultant. I think that they should decide. But this is so wide open that, they could decide to have, 3 categories, and we're looking for 8. And I guess in the discussions, that might come out, but it won't be in the actual proposal and scope. And that's all I'm thinking. Down the road, once there's a scopes submitted, how specific do we want it to be? And maybe we should ask for that in the RFP. Provide examples or provide a template, or I'm not sure how to get there. I don't think it should be dictated. Absolutely not. That's the consultant's work, but examples maybe.
I think the question I'm hearing you ask is, how defined do we want to make this? And how open can we leave it so that we have flexibility working with the consultant? Do we want to create a situation where we can't ask the consultant a question because it's not in the RFP and doesn't show up in his response or her response? Right? Isn't that what you're asking?
Yeah.
If it doesn't end up in the scope, they don't have to do it.
Right.
That's
So
my
there must be a way to build in some flexibility, so when this is negotiated, we can start dealing with those things.
Yeah.
Rather than precluding ourselves from recognizing them at a point when we've gone beyond this.
Well, if I'm just curious, I agree with everything I've heard. The one thing I guess I'm not totally understanding yet is how the town would actually form the contract. I mean, very often you get a situation where the scope of work, in the RFP, the scope of work is incorporated in the contract. Proposal documents that may be made are incorporated in the project, and the consultant needs to know to understand, if they think something is missing or needs to be clarified or is important for the client to understand, their approach and ultimately at some point their bid, you sort of need to say some things. And I agree there's tension between the client, the town being overly prescriptive and, getting proposals back that are, pretty generalized and not very specific. And hitting the sweet spot between those two is kind of an art form. My personal, when I write proposals, I tend to get annoyingly, precise. And, in a recent one, I said, they're talking about transit stations. And I said, all right, let's include the following modes and not because we can't afford to, look at 150,000, micro mobility points. And also get a good handle on New York State subway stations. And, so at some point you're put in a position of, somebody is going to ultimately draw a line. There will be a final product. And, my feeling is we're not in bad shape overall. We might want a little more specificity here and there, but in the RFP requirements, that might well be where it would happen, would be to say, when you respond, particularly when you say how you respond to in terms of methodology, really saying this is what we the kind of thing we need to hear, how you're going to do it, what you think a functional classification looks like, what worked in, East Oshkosh or whatever. Yeah.
So
Travis, any comments on that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, so I think let me back up and say, I think it's good that we to probably be a little bit more specific. We talk about under part 4 anticipated outcomes that here are the type of guides we've seen online as examples, and that we say the scale of this should be suited for something in front of Needham with in terms of its size and the scale of its streets network. And so I think, Newton is, I think which we've continued to talk about is probably the best example, but not the only example. And I think what I would do is I would take some of the information from Newton and others, and I could see us expanding task 3 a little bit to be a little more clearer on the type of things we're looking for the classifications and design elements to include and to have. I don't want to speak for however the town wants to do procurement, and that's a little bit beyond I've done procurement as well from MAPC's perspective, but we've done, I think, some of the things that's been talked about here, which is when you put the scope of work together, you put the RFP together, and then you say, this is what we have a scope. When you ask for a response, what is it that you're looking, what is it that maybe we've missed or need to clarify? And you can do that in a couple different ways, at least, again, this is the way we've done it. One is you have what we call a pre-bid meeting, and you look for questions, or, you ask for, is there anything we need to clarify in the RFP, and including the scope of work? And from that, then you could say, let's put an addendum out. Let's make this a little clearer here or there. Or, you determine, looks like they understood it, but when they respond, you ask for them to put together the scope of work as they see it. And then that, I think, as we mentioned, then your RFP with the scope of work and then their submission and the scope of work are part of the contract. Again, I'm only speaking from my perspective.
Yeah,
as to how we've
all
done
of
it.
those things are all part of our process for RFPs.
Okay.
So we would anticipate all of those things to occur. There'd be pre-bid meeting, questions submitted, or an opportunity for questions to be submitted, answering any questions that are submitted through publicly shared addendum. So there will be, so the document we're looking at is essentially the description that goes into the template that we use for this process. So there's going to be a lot of other things that will be in the actual scope that are not necessarily specific to the content that we're providing through this scope. So that's where all the stuff will be about make sure you submit all the forms, you fill out all this information, you provide your whatever, qualifications that we're asking for. All of those things will be called out in the RFP. But we're really, Travis is really his main task here is helping us with the content, the sort of the subject matter that forms the basis of the scope of work. So I just want to make that clear that there will, it's not, we're not just taking this document and sending it to different firms and they're going to send us back whatever they send us back. There's going to be, once this portion of the project is completed, the town will, on our side, will take this scope of work and submit it to central procurement, and they will help us hammer out the rest of it and fitting it into that template. And then they'll be the ones running the show in terms of assembling the documentation needed to include with the scope and holding the pre-bid meeting and assembling the selection committee, things like that. So that's all going to be handled through the town's procurement. So it's really just the sort of the content, the subject matter that we need to worry about.
I mean, I agree with what Travis said. I mean, what the draft that was submitted. I'm fine with all of that. I think our discussion is getting a little more tactical in terms of where we want to be from an RFP perspective. And I think that yes, we want to, perhaps enhance or push saying multimodal trails, this, that, and the other thing. I think that will be in the RFP. But no, I'm fine with with what is coalescing right now around what was the scope of work for specifically this committee to work with Travis.
Yeah, I am too. I appreciate the clarification that, and I hope it's explicit in the RFP language that the potential bidders will have an opportunity to ask questions before they prepare a bid. That'll be made public, and there could be an addendum to the scope to clarify any uncertainty. So I like that, and that's good news. Another question, if I may, though, on existing conditions and policies. Is the town not going to provide, it doesn't have to be absolutely comprehensive, but a list and link to what we have? I mean, why make each consultant, search? And so, I mean, I guess that's a part of the task, but we've already identified here, I think, way back when, a whole list of relevant documents. We obviously, it's not every document, but might we provide at least a list and some links to, I don't know, half a dozen or a dozen key documents that would speak to task 2?
Yeah, so it says the consultant will use existing data sources. And they'll compile existing data. So all of the materials that we provided Travis will also be provided to the consultant. And then it's really what they're doing with that, what that task 2 is synthesizing all those elements, because what they're ultimately producing is a guide, a report, And so there'll be a section, existing conditions and policies. Well, they'll be summarizing and synthesizing all this data for us, kind of like how Travis did with the PowerPoint, where they're showing, okay, so they have a pedestrian safety audit, they have this, they have that, and then kind of making that a narrative within the design guide itself. That's the product that they're
Right, I get that, but those documents will be listed and linked in the RFP is what I'm suggesting. Is that true or not?
We can. Yeah, I mean,
To say including but
has all
not
those-
limited to, because there could be something that we would, leave out.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Doesn't have to be comprehensive, and I think that language is good. I don't know, it just seems to get various consultants somewhat up to speed. They'll have to still do research on their own to fill it out, but
Yeah, I like that idea.
Given Travis a very lengthy list, I think, and
Sure.
it exists.
I think that's very doable and a good idea. We'll he already has all the information, so.
a good point. Thank you for that feedback.
So maybe with the functional classifications, Travis, like maybe we don't have to be prescriptive as to this is the breakdown that we want necessarily, but
Mhm.
we can say, this is how, using the Newton one as a reference document or something like that. We want something similar to this, and the exact format and details of that will be determined in collaboration with the town, something to that effect.
Yeah,
We don't have to say, this is how it will be set up and this is the methodology necessarily, but just a reference as to this is what we mean by classification of streets. Here's an example, something like that.
yeah, I agree with that, and I appreciate the feedback on, clarifying task 3 like that, talking about the rail trail, about the non-motorized, and then task 2. Very good points, and then understanding a little bit better what we're doing, and also what you're gonna be doing with this in terms of the proposal, so very good feedback, appreciate it.
Thank you, Travis.
I think
Alright.
it looks great for what it's
Yeah.
worth.
I think it's gonna produce a good document, and I think it'll be good for, the town of Needham to.
Okay, well, I'll work on making these changes and get it back to Tyler, and like I said, very helpful feedback. And hope that then, you can move forward with it and get a great report, or get a great document and move forward, so.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we may need to discuss on the town side is the GIS portion of things and how that plays into the budget. We sent around the budget to everybody that Travis said, sort of our ballpark figure, but is the GIS element still something that we're interested in terms of the interactive map? I know we discussed that in a previous meeting, but just so that we're all on the same page.
Is that explicit in the RFP?
So task 5, GIS mapping.
Okay,
So basically the report will be a PDF, similar to the one that
Right.
Newton published. But this is different from that in that there is a actual interactive version where you can go in and say, okay, this is my street. What bucket is it in?
Right.
And then what are the recommended treatments for that type?
right. And if it is included, does the town need to make sure that whatever online GIS is consistent with the towns?
Absolutely. That's why I brought it up. Yeah.
Okay, and I mean, it's not explicit yet.
Yeah.
right?
And this would be similar to the construction. Like the
Construction
GIS
updates,
that we've
yeah.
done. Okay.
But it would be hosted by this consultant, or at least developed by them in terms of the platform, so it might be a little more advanced, I guess, is how I would say it.
And on that, I think we would want to be prescriptive to make sure it is, whatever the word is, compatible with DPW's existing GIS, no?
Yeah, so it looks like in here we said just the guide should be provided in a format that will, I think it makes sense to be a little bit more explicit about that, just to say that the GIS or the mapping portion will be developed in conjunction with the town's GIS staff for to ensure compatibility with existing GIS mapping.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
And
That's a
maybe
good
just
point.
heading down that path a couple of feet further, a lot of stuff we've done for the MBTA are these dynamic maps of bus route characteristics and other statistics we developed, but the MBTA winds up basically owning and hosting that, in effect indefinitely.
Right.
It would only add compatible and accessible to public who want to access it once it's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah,
Should be a requirement.
yeah,
of that.
accessible and easily understood or something like that.
To layman.
Yeah. could reasonably be used by. Yeah. So that was the only thing I wanted to bring up.
Were you thinking of maybe excluding that part? You asked if we were still interested in it. Were you thinking?
Well, it's just-
Not
it's just-
necessary or?
No, no.
Expensive or?
Well, it'll definitely be more expensive. But
yes.
I'm only mentioning it because it's a little bit different than the example. I mean, I don't know about. Charlotte or Minneapolis, but
Mhm.
I think doesn't Minneapolis have some kind of interactive?
Yeah, Minneapolis is a great example of the interactive GIS online.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
So maybe even reference that in this section just for reference.
And reference the town's software, I think, right? Whatever you use for GIS mapping, right? Isn't that what?
Well, compatibility covers that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not learned enough about GIS to,
I'm not.
that's why I think we need to talk on our side
Yeah.
to sort of, so then maybe that's something I can follow up with Travis on offline.
Yeah.
There's definitely opportunities of improvement for the town's GIS program. Let's just say we have dabbled, we have purchased some modules, we have done some exploratory work, and I think that there has been some good mapping. But as far as using GIS to really look at and evaluate and make decisions, I think the town has some opportunities to explore further for the utilization of the tool. We don't do what other towns and municipalities have used GIS for.
Well, at DPW, we have one guy.
No, I get that. I'm just saying there's movement forward. I'm not saying and evaluating. I'm saying we could do more. I'm just,
Right.
I understand there's one guy, and there's, from a resourcing perspective, it's also the fact that probably it's not just a resourcing perspective. It's probably the investment into a GIS program is not what maybe other towns have done. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm saying that we can do a lot more. Other towns and other municipalities have done a lot more with GIS than we have. And there's opportunity. That's all I'm saying.
Jim?
Two final budget questions. Is it the case that the town is not going to provide an estimated budget? I'm assuming that's the case, but please, what's the town's thinking on that?
Typically, we provide a not to exceed budget.
Okay, and is there some number in mind now?
So that's why we had asked Travis to provide that. Did you get the budget that I sent?
I didn't look at the most recent, no.
Yeah, I know I sent like 5 emails.
Okay, so it's in there.
Yeah, so he has it broken down by task and by hours. So that's one of the other things we want to verify on our side is this a
Okay.
good rate and.
What's the number? What's the overall?
I think it was like 100.
125,000.
Okay,
125.
and are we going to, in the budget request, ask for it by task?
Ask for their pricing by task?
Yes.
We can. We usually. It's up to us, so probably.
I think it's a good idea myself. It's more comparison. You understand where their level of effort is better, but.
I would say, I would be surprised if that was not the baseline position. For those who will be working on the RFP.
Okay, good.
But we can always advise them that that's our.
I'm just asking, I mean, I
preference.
think it's more information is better.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just a related question, have we built something that we can afford within this budget?
So that's one of the reasons why I was asking about I
Yeah.
think. Karis, do you have any opinion on that question?
She shook her head.
Yeah, I mean,
I think this is-
that number does not sound to me like it includes a GIS deliverable. Just
So,
as an observation.
I have suggested in the past that perhaps there needs to be a request to FinCom and town meeting for a higher budget for what we want to do. I mean, obviously, I am not a town employee. I can say what I want and be,
Yeah.
you know, and be free to say this, but I believe that for the trajectory of where we want to go, I think that, you know, it all comes down to the fact that we need to request more money from town meeting to be able to hit some of the aspirational points that we want to do. But I will carry.
Justin empowers me to agree with them a little bit more. I mean, frankly, as a consultant, if I saw that number and I saw that scope,
We're very-
we can't make any money on it.
The fact that we run this town on a razor thin budget the way we do, it's amazing to Karis and to your credit. But honestly, I think there needs to be some conversations with FinCom, the select board, and town meeting to be able to do this. But I think you're about to say something, Karis.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, like, on the GIS side of it, as opposed to the financial side of it. So we do have a fairly sophisticated, I mean, we have an Esri system, which is, from what I understand, a pretty strong standard, and we're investigating whether or not we should upgrade to the highest tier of that. I think, as Tyler indicated, we only have one GIS person in-house. So that is less than many comparable communities. And one of the things that we have not done particularly well and we're working on is integrating what our consultants are working on with our GIS system into the town system. So a good example would be, we had a consultant do a lighting inventory of the town. We were talking about, this was probably 2 decades ago, removing street lights at the time as an energy savings measure. So as part of that, we had GIS that was collected by an outside company that was never integrated into our GIS system. So what we haven't done, or when we did like a pedestrian study, we've done other things. So effectively what they're doing is taking our data, oftentimes tweaking it and then regurgitating it back to us. We just haven't gotten the back into our system part. So they're not going to be starting from scratch. I mean, we have a roadway and sidewalk network in our Esri database right now from the work that was done for our PCI and for our sidewalk inventory. So it's really about grabbing those layers and then using some information that we don't currently have about, you know, what's not in there. We don't have roadway width in there, right? We don't have sidewalk on both sides. We don't have any bike lane, or we know whether or not there's markings on the road. So those are the things that would need to be overlaid back into the system, which isn't as comprehensive as mapping the entire town out from scratch.
Is there, in regards to the budget here, are there grant opportunities that we should be looking for to complete this?
Yeah, I think everything's on the table. I think we will take this budget, kind of take it behind the scenes, talk to our engineers, talk to the GIS analyst, and but I think we can always take things out of scope. We should focus on making it the way that we want it, and then we can kind of go from there. If that, you know, if it ends up being too expensive than what the town wants to go for, then we just work backwards.
We are like the scope is putting us in like the Vision Zero, like, you know, other like planning things that are requirements for other grants, right? So it's,
yeah, I think it's a pretty it's a shoppable project for Grambling.
Jim.
Given the comments on the GIS, I had this, I'm not a GIS person, but I've had projects in my consulting world that included GIS, and it was a very significant fraction of the budget. From Duncan or anyone else, do we think this is, you know, a third of the budget, more? And if so, might we want to have that bid separately? In other words, give us a number for everything but, and give us a number for that. And that would at least make it really clear whether the 125, which Mo asked about, is, you know, is doable for the whole scope or not.
Yeah, so on the budget, it says
Oh, I've not seen this most recent. Maybe I should have called that outside.
It accounts for like
I didn't
a
receive
quarter of
it.
the cost.
Just a
Yeah,
suggestion.
and I'll just say, I haven't had a, you know, this is the GIS piece is the piece that I feel the least confident about, and I'm just at this point, you know, working on this and happy to talk to Tyler and others about this, and we'll talk internally as well, and you know, maybe what's the best way to move forward on that. Because I think that, you know, I think a lot of it is, what do you have, from what I'm hearing, like that you currently have as a town that's available to the consultant, and what the consultant we think maybe has to build up from the ground up. And I think that those are some real wild cards that we just need to, or some things we need to scope out a little bit more and think about. So, I kind of, if you don't mind, I think I'd like to think about that and talk internally here at MVPC about that, and then get back to you as to what we think that is.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Yeah, my sort of initial instinct is that a quarter of that overall number is doable, but it assumes there's a pretty good handshaking there and a pretty good level of knowledge of, you know, like if we do work with the MBTA now, we know all their stuff. And, you know, doing another interactive map, you know, it's kind of like, okay, you know, not such a big deal. But you know, a lot of effort was spent in establishing what they could do, what we could do, and the latest deliverable we gave them, they wanted to do the work themselves, and I just gave them 5 or 6 pages of equations. I said, you know, go for it. So, you know, it can be all over the place, and that would, you know, be part of a consultant's decision to go after or not if they know what the town has and wants to work with, and you know, that kind of thing. Then they can decide, hey, we can do that, or maybe it's going to cost us a lot to do that.
In the interest of time and Justin's efforts, I think we've given him a lot of information. Should we not let him work his magic? Get
Yes.
back to us, and then we can have a discussion about what we can live with out if we need to, or bid separately at another meeting.
I think so.
Travis, you mean,
Yeah,
right?
Travis.
Travis, right?
Yeah.
I thought I said Travis.
So
I've,
Justin, that's fine. Yeah.
Oh, I said so.
Yeah, I agree. I think we start from what we want and we whittle it down to what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay,
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Travis.
Thanks, Travis.
Yeah.
We'll
Yep.
keep in
Thank you.
touch.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the updates to the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan.
Yes. Did you all get to the annotated version that I sent around?
Yes.
So I guess just from a general point of view, there are just a few items that have been completed as described, right? There are a number of items where we've done elements of the project, like the easiest or sort of the most common thing is that we've done the ADA the accessible ramps in many of these
Can
locations.
Goose join us?
Yeah,
tonight?
Yeah,
yeah.
you can
Share my computer.
Sure.
So some of those priorities have changed because some of the locations we did something else instead that would preclude whatever was described. So those are things that I would tweak in the newest version of the plan. But and the major thing that we would be adding would be the Great Plain Avenue redesign project that's going on. So I guess I would just say that, does anything jump out at us in terms of things you want to know more about, or that you'd like to target specifically, or you know, there's probably like 15 or so things there, so you know, it's like quite a bit of things.
So is this, is this document used specifically for obtaining the Complete Streets funding from MassDOT? Is that kind of
Correct.
like, these projects are somewhat reserved for that funding?
So they're not reserved, so many of the ones that we did do work on, we didn't use the funding for, so. Just because it's on the list doesn't mean that we can only use, or that we want to only use the money that's available through the grant program. Because if we did that, then we probably would be, you know, it's a prioritization plan, right? We wanna be attacking these as soon as feasible. It's a priorities and a policy document as well as the method to access the funds. Because we'll be utilizing our allocation for this 3-year period on the downtown project, we'll have to find alternative funding sources or existing funding sources for the other projects that's listed.
Okay, and they're not like these, a lot, like some of these show up in the capital plan, but like some of them aren't, so like, is it,
Right.
are we working with money that we have? Like, if there's like when would we tackle like each of these projects outside of?
So we have, you know, the capital budgeting process. As part of that process, there are priority projects that we would either append to the end of the 5-year plan, or if they're already in the plan, maybe we pull them up. And the further out they are, the more of a sort of ballpark figure the estimate is in the 5-year plan. As we pull them forward, we need more and more specific numbers so that town meeting can effectively fund the projects. Some of the projects, or many of them, one of the reasons why we have the funding structure that we do in DPW with the Public Works Infrastructure article. The way that it's broken up is a portion of that money is for sidewalks and a portion of that money is for street resurfacing. Within that street resurfacing, there's subcategories that it's sort of up to DPW's discretion how much is spent, how much is apportioned to each strategy or what have you. So there's kind of 2 ways to tackle it. One is like a project specific approach where typically we would do that with intersections. So the Public Works Infrastructure funding mechanism also has a carve out for intersection improvements. And there are, you know, usually we'll have a design and or construction phase for an intersection per year on that 5-year capital plan. So we might be designing one intersection with funding 1 year and then constructing another one that year. And those amounts are based on our priority. So if within that list, there's an intersection or section of a larger project that we want to tackle, then that's something that we could incorporate into our 5-year plan through the intersection improvements thing. Or it can just be a matter of, okay, this is how much money we have for sidewalks this year. We're choosing to spend this amount of that on improvements at this location. We have that discretion. That's why we set it up that way. But for the larger projects, especially if anything involves like putting in signals or things like that, those things are handled through a specific project allocation.
So are you looking? Sorry, are you looking for like what are you looking from this committee for? What? Because I know that. Are you looking to define the priority or verify the priority? Because I know that obviously. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
No, because I know that obviously that may change due to I don't know, former select board members trying to, call and change some things, on a priority for certain signals. Like what? I'm being tongue in cheek, but are you looking for the MPCC to help define the prioritization of this Complete Streets this plan that you have annotated, and you'll be able to then give priority to what projects that then the DPW will then seek funding from town meeting or Chapter 90 or whatever funds that they can get for. Is that what this is for? Correct?
Right, so basically, when this list was developed, there was a public engagement portion of that process.
Uh-huh.
That helped to identify what's on the list now. When we update the list, it is our choice to what degree we solicit feedback on whatever gets updated. We probably would not have a full public engagement again, just to update the list, right?
Mhm.
So, and with the list, there was only one actual project that we submitted for funding for since the list has been created through this program, through the Complete Streets program. Because we utilized our maximum allocation, spent all the money on that project, that was the Harris Avenue project. And so now we're reloaded, but we're kind of setting that money aside for the downtown. So if that's the plan, I don't want these things on this list to sort of hang out in limbo without generally, as a person that's new in my position, with a committee that's, a new committee, that the issues that we're supposed to be talking about are directly related to this plan. All I'm looking for is, general feedback as to the projects that are on it, which ones do we think are really are high priorities. I'm not looking for, let's number these 1 through 20 or whatever. It's just kind of, I put the comments in there to give you all sort of informational, this is where we stand on all these items. And
No, they're very good
somehow
comments.
I might be halfway done.
Yeah, no, I went through them all and they were very good comments. And I knew some of them from TSC, and the work that we've done here. So no, thank you for clarifying what the ask was, because I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and obviously there's a limited number of funds to be able to do this work. So obviously, some feedback to be able to prioritize is needed. I also think that maybe a pass through TSC might be also advantageous for you to help in your position now.
Yeah, and I'm not thinking that we're gonna hash this all out necessarily tonight.
Mhm.
As much as it was kind of an opportunity to say, what do people think about these projects, my notes, like, is there anything that jumps out to people? And conversations can continue offline or however we want to do it. It's just
No, and sorry, and my tongue-in-cheek remark was regarding Greendale and Great Plain, and there was some significant effort to speak about that area and the knockoff implications of the whole area around Peacedale and et cetera. And that actually came up today. I know that Tom was engaged. So I know that there are, the reason why I was asking, because I know we may, from an MPCC perspective, give you feedback, but I didn't know from a criteria whether we are defining that or just merely giving you the ideas, because I know that there is political or there is political pressure or ex-political pressure to be able to kind of push some projects into priority versus what we as an MPCC would be able to do. So that's what I just wanted to kind of figure out what our ask was.
Jim?
A few questions, if I may. One, I think you already answered. These are not in a priority order now, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and what's the vintage of this list? When was it developed?
It was developed in 2017 and 2018,
And,
which is part of the reason why I'm bringing it up, so that we can kind of dust it off and.
right, and is DPW planning to actually update it?
Yes,
In 2025?
in the next like 6 months. Because we want to get the Great Plain Avenue project in the list, but it gives us an opportunity. You can't update it whenever you want as needed. you basically have an opportunity to update it every so often. And then when you do, those projects are locked in, because the reason they do that is because then you just be able to get whatever you want funded. What you could pull it into the list and take it out the next day, you know, so they're just looking for, you get an opportunity every so often to update the list based on, you know, completion or priorities that have changed or what have you. So that this is our shot. So that's why I'm, you know, this is my due diligence.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are there other projects other than the Great Plain Avenue project that are being considered to add?
So there are projects within the capital plan that are not listed in this plan. Some of the intersections, so that's things that are in the queue for funding.
Yeah.
Are not necessarily reflected on this list, so it's not an exhaustive list.
Right, if I can follow up on that point, that was my other question. What's the relationship between the complete streets priorities and the capital planning priorities? I mean, it seems like there are two sets. There's, I assume, some overlap, but
So this is more of an aspirational document. It doesn't require, it does and it doesn't. It doesn't really require estimates to be calculated and, our capital process is more, specific in terms of, okay, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to do it and when, and this is the dollar, figure that we're attaching to it. This is really like the pool of things that, okay, this is really important to people, and I'm hearing about this from residents, I'm hearing about this from the MPCC or TSC. This is something that I want to pull forward. It remains on the list, but then it gets put into the capital plan. The capital plan is a smaller grouping, and it's highly tied to what we can feasibly expect the town to fund in any given year. So so typically it's, for the infrastructure article, I have the sidewalk money, the streets resurfacing money, an intersection. We wouldn't have two intersections for construction or design in the same year. And then any drainage or guardrail work that needs to happen, which is mainly handled through the engineering division. So it's kind of like, this is the grab bag of ideas that we want to do, and then when we have an opportunity or there's an expressed desire by the community, we can pull things into it and attach a dollar amount to it and pull it to the front of the line.
And it's required to maintain this list for state funding for projects, right? And we have to have this list, it has to be there. Because we've accepted money before and because we plan on accepting it in the future.
So so municipalities are not required to be part of the program. Many are, most are, but it's really it's the money that you're trying to get access to, because we've chosen to strategize in such a way where we're allocating those funds to large projects. It's worked out this way, but other municipalities might take some of the money, do a smaller project one year, do a different project the next year, and just kind of chip away at it. Many of the projects on our list are sort of medium to large size projects. So that's one of the reasons why, I wouldn't say, let's add 20 more items to this list, because that would really be harder to tell what really is a priority. So this is our starting point, and then we're kind of, with me in my role now, and things a little bit different. We have a new, relatively new town engineer. We have you guys. It's kind of an opportunity to start a new chapter on the list.
Is it worth trying to develop a screening mechanism that prioritizes? So maybe the first, I'm just off the top of my head, safety. For the death, and have some sort of priority or rank order.
You mean trying to
Or
rank what's
evaluating
in
whether
this
or not
list?
to put well, with respect to the existing list. Look at them, not saying do an intensive study, but get a sense of what is gonna produce the best result in terms of, I'll put safety first for the. It's much,
Yeah.
right? So, and then the next step down, traffic throughput or ease of maintenance, I don't know.
Yeah,
And then that would help you when you're looking at this list 1 and 2 for the capital planning process. Help evaluate public requests for
yeah,
relief of the situation.
yeah. I think there probably is some order if we really tried to put it in an order, but I feel like it's not as useful as, okay, what are the top 3 things that we think are super important? Let's pull those ones out, and we can use safety or whatever dimension to identify those.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
But it's, yeah, I think that, just like you said, there's sort of different lenses that you'd be looking at each of these through, and then, but one of those is the support of this committee, public feedback, there are certain projects or topics that I get calls about all day, and that's another thing that would play into my calculus. So it's just a, listening session.
I would probably, the first step, I think, with this list would be to remove the projects that are complete, right? Like, I think there are 5 on here that you could just remove, so it's kind of less to look at.
Right.
And then add the Great Plain project. I think it's probably better to have fewer projects on here, right? Like, than too many.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's no limit to the number of projects that we can put on it, but the more priorities you put on the list, the less prioritized they are, right?
Yeah.
Just
So-
a point of clarification. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Justin,
no,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Because I was on the committee, I was in the committee to form the committee. But one of the things that we talked about when we formulated the MPCC and we came as a committee to get together, and one of the asks, and I know Karis is no longer on the line because she was part of this, but was to be able to help the DPW prioritize these projects, to almost give political cover, because for this prioritization list. We've always talked about this 5-year capital plan. Everyone talks about the 5-year capital plan. Can we see the 5-year capital plan? Can we help to in terms of like what are the improvements of the intersections of where is the tip funding coming in to what is the strategic plan? These are things that was the meat and potatoes of my understanding of why one of the reasons we formed this committee, and was to be able to give Karis and her department political cover for because everyone wants every street redone at every single time. There's a demand to get every street done and every intersection done because it's all unsafe and it all sucks and mass drivers suck and Needham drivers are worse, blah 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 blah. And but here one of the reasons why we had talked about this was for us to be able to kind of help to formulate and prioritize the long-term plans. TSC was really there for the short-term gain of what can be done in the short term. So for the long term, and this is great, Tyler, the complete streets here. But are there other what are the plans on the 5-year capital plan? I know that there's Greendale Great Plain Ave was there, and that's 2028 was on your notes and blah blah blah. What is the 5-year plan, and then what can we as the MPCC do to help you be able to provide that political cover, really, to be fair, so that you can do what you want to do, and then we can help to make sure that we guide and prioritize these projects for the betterment of the town.
Yeah, So the 5-year capital plan is publicly available. If it's helpful to you all, I can send around the portion that is relevant to this discussion.
Sure.
Which shows, you know, that infrastructure mechanism that we use to fund everything I just mentioned. One of the committee's charges is to have a meeting to go over the DPW capital plan. And we're supposed to do that in the fall, so that's something that we would be looking at in depth during that, however, whatever format we choose to do that. But for everyone's reference, I'm happy to send around, just so you can get a sense of what it looks like and how projects might be replicated from this list into that. Because that's ultimately how, so you'll be able to see like how some things are general. And, you know, we might do 20 ADA ramps on a corridor of road, but it doesn't say Webster Street ramps. It says like sidewalk rehabilitation and ADA compliance or something like that.
Right.
So that, just to give you a sense of that, I think that'd be helpful. But
And it would, and even for you know, and I know obviously Alex is right there, but from planning perspective, like this would help the board to be able to make their decisions on, you know, site plan reviews and special permits, of knowing what are the improvements that are being done in certain areas. That has always been a hot topic. There has been a question. So I think having that information available would be great.
sure.
Just a point of information, the Complete Streets funding is but one source from the state. There are other transportation, road and so forth funds available, and this is a relatively small portion of the total, is that correct?
It's actually one of the main programs for the state that is related to transportation. The other major bucket of funding is the Shared Streets program, which is similar. The Complete Streets program is set up so that you know, specifically so that you have this list and you draw from it, and that's what's eligible for the funding. Versus Shared Streets is, this is the project we want to do, we're applying, and then we get the money just for that one project. Shared Streets or Complete Streets, there's a maximum cap on how much funding you can receive in any given 3-year period. Shared Streets is essentially, how much do you think this project is going to be? We'll fund it if we agree with, if we like the application. Then there's Chapter 90, which is
That's what I
sort
was
of general.
thinking.
Yeah, so that is a grant program and it isn't, because we're not, we don't have to tell them in advance how we're gonna, what locations we're gonna spend the money on. So that's one of the biggest differences, but in terms of raw dollars, that is the largest.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so you're right.
Can you just give us a broad sense of the three pools? Chapter 90 last year was X millions. And
Yeah, so Chapter 90 is a program where you don't have to use the funds that you get every year, so it can roll over. So over the last few years, or the last 6 to 7 years, we've basically pocketed that money and saved it up in anticipation for these downtown projects that kind of happened and then didn't happen, and
Right.
so.
And is that on average, just a rough number, 5 million a year, more or less?
No, so we have approximately 6 million on our ledger right now. And
So maybe $1 million a year,
so it's a
saving 6 or 7 years?
yeah,
Okay.
it's like about that. It's based on a formula based on how many lane miles you have in your town.
Right,
But they don't dictate where it goes, only that it needs to be spent on projects that lengthen the lifespan of the infrastructure of
Right.
sidewalks and roads.
and the 3-year Complete Streets number, how many millions was that?
So that's 600,000. So you can get 600,000 every 3 years.
Okay. And-
Or smaller portions of that for smaller projects.
Yeah.
As long as within the 3-year period, they don't exceed 600,000.
Okay, and the shared streets roughly?
So that is, I'm not sure if it has a maximum, but I would say typically projects funded through that are no more than $500,000.
And you can have multiple a year or not really?
No, only
No.
one application.
One a
per-
year,
per
okay.
fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I think you know, if you wanna drop down on the list a little bit. And
Yeah.
then do you want us to,
So you're all welcome to send me any comments you might have, anything you noticed, anything you might have a question about.
you have a consultant, right? I think you said last time that will help you write the new ones or something.
So I looked into this a little bit and the initial formulation of the plan involves a lot more, so you need to have, a consultant will help you with the public engagement,
Okay.
they'll help you with, there's more of a, sort of bureaucracy paperwork upfront. When you're updating the plan, it requires a lot less work, so we're really not going to need the services of a consultant.
Okay. Good.
If the plan was 10 years old and we were updating it, we probably would, just for the public engagement aspect of it, but. We're in this kind of middle ground where I think we're crossing some items off the list and then just sort of retooling others, so. A consultant won't be necessary for the update.
But otherwise, I think the list looks good. I think our design plan with some of our maybe like sidewalk design guide and bike lane design guide may help dictate what the projects look like.
Yes.
Compared to what they're kind of spelled out to you now, so.
Exactly, I think once we have that product, that will really help inform. What we're prescribing under each project.
And then, so the next, the updates on the downtown redesign, bottleneck ramp and other DPW projects.
Okay, so I'll make this quick, so downtown redesign, DPW finalized a scope for the first phase of the downtown redesign contract with environmental partners. That phase of the project will take us through the end of the calendar year, and that's gonna include survey work, traffic studies, sort of the developing the project brand and campaign, that kind of thing. We're gonna start doing some of the public outreach events, including hopefully having a presence at the Harvest Festival. Harvest Festival? Fair. And having that sort of be this, just the sort of the launch of the concept, and then have people give ideas as to what their feedback is on that. That'll be one of several events that will pop up events that we'll want to do. So that scope was approved for Chapter 90 funding. That's one of the activities that is eligible for Chapter 90 funding. So we're in the process of contracting with them formally, but they've begun they helped us apply for a federal grant to fund the pilot phase of the project, which we're still projecting would happen next summer. They gave us some concepts as to what they would be piloting just for the purposes of the grant. We applied 2 weeks ago. We've been told that the federal grants are somewhat challenging to be awarded, especially if you're not in environmental justice community. But we think that the way that our project is going to be useful for the Boston Region MPO safety action plan, which is one of the prerequisites for the grant. We framed it as, okay, this pilot's gonna give you a lot of data to inform the action plan. So they like that. So we're hopeful that that'll get, and then we got a letter of support from that organization for our project. So we're hoping that that'll give us a leg up. So that's downtown. And we've just started now we have the framework for the working group in place. And I think that the next step will be appointing people to the working group Many of them are by, you know, a representative from this committee or a representative from that committee. So that'll be something that you'll all be hearing about pretty soon. Because somebody from this committee will be part of the working group. So that's the downtown, so that's going around along swimmingly. I think after this phase of things. In this next spring, that's when they'll really start nailing down the beginning of the design process with regards to the pilot, because the pilot will be happening in the summer, so they'll be, you know, sort of developing, okay, this is what we want to test, this is what we want to model. So that'll be phase 2 of the design process.
When do you think you'll hear back on the grant?
The federal grant,
Mhm.
by the end of the year.
And does the pilot go forward without the grant?
Depends on if we can fund it.
Got it.
We submitted for, it's like, the estimate we submitted was for $400,000. It's a very expensive pilot.
Mhm.
So put it on the
Yeah.
pile.
Wow.
We would be eligible to use chapter 90 funding on the pilot. If we chose to go that. Okay. Bottleneck grant, so we, with the consultants that we've been working on for the intersections downtown. They proposed signal improvements and some slight, it's not even really lane modifications as much as it's just clarifying turning movements and where the lanes are. And adding like, as you're heading west past the bank, putting down markers showing that the lanes are merging, things like that, that are just kind of clarify like how the traffic pattern should work. And in addition to upgraded technology at the signals to enhance detection. So they're in the final stages of developing the plans and specifications for that to be bid out by the town. So we would be looking to implement those changes probably in the spring, early spring. They shouldn't be that affected by the pilot because they're not really changing the lanes or anything like that.
So Tyler, I'm sorry to interrupt. So currently, just so I can wrap my head around it. Currently, right now, the signals are coordinated on timing and not necessarily on optical sensing of throughput. Correct? Because I remember that was one of the initial when the design went through for the town center. It was sold as there were optical sensors that were looking at there was an intelligence to the signaling system that would look for number of cars rather than the time of actuation between and this is something that they're proposing to do more optical sensing so that there is a throughput based on the number of cars rather than the time of signal. Is it
so the dynamic actuated signals is something that we are pursuing. It requires more of a hardware upgrade than the existing signals are not capable of doing that. The main benefit of the improvements that they'll be making is improvements to detection, which will allow for more complicated signal patterns. So it won't be quite like, you know, the signal's thinking to itself, oh, I got a lot of traffic coming this way, like I better shorten that phase, but it'll be more of the
it's
okay,
timing plus it's knowing what is coming in and detection. I get it. Yeah. Okay. So, but it's okay.
Yeah, so it'll be more advanced on the detection. The town is working on a separate track to pursue more advanced coordination.
Got it. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Pedestrian signal included in there or not?
Yes. That's part of the phasing that it'll be more advanced in terms of the number of variations it can do.
To remove the really long one. when the train comes through?
Well, that's one of the things we brought up with the consultants, so that they're trying to address, so yeah.
It's interesting. One of the complaints, which I think is great for pedestrians, and I think that because the town center had done their brick crosswalks were essentially allowing diagonal movement. So you're looking at a pedestrian only cycle. That's when you limit then the ability for some vehicular and bicycle movement, is when you always allow for a pedestrian. Which I think is actually fine and great what we do, because we allow diagonal movements, which is not something that is typical, but nonetheless, from a throughput perspective, yeah, but it sucks when you sit there and press the button. You got to wait 95, 105 seconds for you to be able to then walk across the street.
Yep.
But
So that's specifically mentioned in the scope that for their work was to address that issue. So, this upgrade should, part of the upgrade is not just the hardware, but actual phasing optimization. Just the last thing that I want to talk about is just the remainder of our project on Webster Street. We're going to be complete or sort of initiating the final phase of that project. This week or either this week or early next week. And that will involve milling the street surface. We were able to pave from Dedham Avenue up through May Street, but everything beyond May Street was left until we could get the contractor scheduled. We thought that we might not be able to do it initially. We wanted to get it done before the school year started, but that came and went. So then it was looking like we were going to have to do it in the spring, but we've worked it out with the police where we'll be able to work in front of the school, in front of the high school, only when school is actively in session, and then they'll work on another portion of the street during pickup and drop off, or the times where people are coming and going. So that will be completed in its entirety by the end of this month. We'll have the raised crosswalks will be completed to their final height of 3 inches. The permanent pavement markings will be put down, and you'll see a brand new nice black surface out there, and we'll finally be done.
Does that end on Highland or before Highland?
It ends on High Street, so
High
the triangle with
Yep.
because that was the limit of the.
Yep.
It kind of started.
they just did pavement markings there on, yeah, those are brand new on High Street, those crosswalks.
Yep. So I just wanted to let you all know that the end is in sight on that.
And Dedham Ave.
Yeah.
So that's complete, almost complete now, right? Some over, I think.
More markings.
Yeah, so when I use this corridor, I guess the couple things is, number one, that the pedestrian and the vehicle detection at the intersection of Webster Street and Dedham Ave is very advanced and works very well. But the no turn, like the turning, vehicles turning on red, and it makes a very kind of uncomfortable situation. So like, what was there thought about adding a no turn on red there? As we like improve the pedestrian walkway down that road?
To be honest with you, I don't think it was considered as part of that project, but I'm open to it.
Yeah,
It sounds like a
Which
TSC.
intersection?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that maybe
and Webster?
like going forward, like if you're improving, especially if you're improving the pedestrian experience, like, a no turn on red makes the most sense. So like, not just, specifically this intersection, but if you did it somewhere else, it should probably be the default. And if we're able to easily do that as like, the reconstruction process goes through, I don't know what that has to be voted on or.
Well, that's sort of a policy question that I think this group would fall under this group's umbrella.
I think most signals that we have are no turn on red, which is contrary to whether you like it or not, federal law. Whether you agree with the fuel consumption issues of the 1978 and Massachusetts being the last state to adopt no turn on red. No turn on red is the default, but I believe most of our intersections, I think there's only, I can think of probably 4 or 5 that are allowing turn on red. We actually have no turn on red signs in the majority of our signals, now that I think about it. But I mean, yes, that you're right. Whether we adopt as a policy of a town, obviously New York, Washington D.C., Seattle are the 3 large
English.
municipalities that have said that we're going to do no turn on red as policy, and we obviously as a municipality can try to, if we want to make that policy decision to do so. But I think we can probably come with a hybrid approach. I think there's certain intersections in certain areas that I think it's fine. But yeah, I mean, obviously Webster, and I agree with you, Tim, that because of the diagonal, that perhaps.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just, since you redid the sidewalk, especially under the bridge, there's just a lot more people using it than there ever was before. And when you press the pedestrian signal, like the light changes very quickly, it detects bikes when you're on the road, so, it just makes sense that it would be improved.
Yeah.
At that point.
I think engineering would take a look at it and evaluate it, but I'm certainly not against it.
And then the other question I had, and I don't know, maybe a question, but the bike lane that's on Dedham Ave now, I know there's kind of, there's no plan to use flex posts. But I think it makes sense to put them in maybe some key areas. Is it possible to have that done? Do we have?
It is.
You know,
We don't have a stockpile
Yeah.
ready to be deployed, but we have used them in some locations. We haven't used them along a bike lane for. One of the reasons that we've held off on that is because we've observed with the project up on Highland Avenue that they're constantly knocked over, destroyed, knocked into the roadway. I, as a cyclist, like I like them and I appreciate their value as protection or just sort of the feel of it. But I know that there's some reluctance internally about them because we think that they might just get run over and smash into the street. But I'm not opposed.
yeah,
There's also the snow elements, which is something that I'm trying to sort of push us forward on.
Mhm.
Everything is sort of viewed through the lens of, oh, well, that's gonna make it really hard to plow that. So we're trying to, you had sent along some stuff about things that are either detachable or seasonal or whatever, so I think that's something that we want to pursue
Yeah.
further.
I think it's probably a good opportunity to trial some because it's not very long. Like it wouldn't be, if you tried to put them on Greendale Ave, it would be
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
2 miles of a flex post, but they can be used. Like the studies show that like right turn movements are speeding is reduced significantly when there are delineated bike lanes. So like I'm thinking at Warren Street where there's like a really sweeping fast turn. That like some of the flex posts in that section may slow down drivers turning right there. To protect the crosswalk that's crossing the street there. And then just some like in a few other places may help to just kind of calm additional traffic calming in the street.
Yeah. I am open to it and I think I would like to talk to the traffic control folks and see if we can, if I can get a sense of the pricing, how installation might work, things like that.
Okay.
I agree. I mean, listen, they're going to get hit just like the one at Webster and Webster and Highland for the delineating of the state when they put that got hit like 5 or 6 times. In the beginning, it's going to get hit, but once people get used to it, it won't. And I think it's going to do what its intended effect is. So yes, I think whatever control we end up putting in, especially when it's new, is going to get damaged. But as long as that's put in the calculus from the long term, I think it actually will benefit if we do.
Yeah. I'm
Tim
not
said.
against them by any means. I honestly am kind of exasperated that I can't imagine just plowing into these things and knocking them over, but
Yeah.
apparently it happens.
Some of them are probably from trailers, like taking a
Yeah.
corner or whatever, but, they are, studies have shown that they significantly reduce right turning speed, so. This is a good opportunity to test that out, and then when we go forward, we put buffered bike lanes in other areas. We know
Yeah.
that they work and people are used to what they look like because we don't really have them everywhere, but some other places do.
I
just to get them
personally,
in the front.
I would always gravitate towards the buffer, but that wasn't really an option for this particular location because of the poles mainly, but I'm definitely open to it.
Sure. The buffer is just the core striping. I guess you consider that still a buffer, technically.
Like 2 foot buffer.
2 foot buffer. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right, the next agenda item is appointment of a representative to the downtown working group. Market meeting. I do have interest in being there on that seat, so discussion with that,
It sounds good to me, but
I would nominate you.
okay?
I would second that nomination, but let's see if anyone else is
Anyone else
interested.
interested?
I'm already on it from TSC, so I'm
Okay. So we'll take a vote on that. Chair votes by a vote for myself.
Of course.
Yeah.
You can,
Chair
yes.
votes aye. Duncan,
Okay. All right.
Mo?
Aye.
James
Aye.
and Justin?
Aye.
So I'll be the designee to that one. Thank you. And then
Thank you.
the next item is the MBTA Communities Act rezoning. I was just wondering if the group had any interest in writing a letter of maybe support or approval of the MBTA zoning that's going in front of the town meeting in October.
I would so move,
Did we do?
yes.
Okay,
There were 2 proposals before town meeting,
correct.
so I would move that we write a letter of support with respect to both proposals.
Okay,
That's what I was gonna ask about, that there are 2 and we should be specific, and I would second that motion.
okay. Justin?
I would abstain being a member. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yes, obviously I want to go for the neighborhood plan, but I'm on the planning board, which is the sponsor to
Okay.
town meeting. So
Yeah.
I think I will abstain.
Okay,
Just
There is a small wrinkle that came before the planning board last meeting.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there's been quite a lot of discussion about 100 West Street and whether that should be in the, it's actually in both plans, the change to the dimensional and FAR in there. And there's some significant opposition to inclusion of that. I don't know if we have to get into it or not, but in my own communication with the planning board, I have indicated my view on that change, that it doesn't have to be in the MBTA zoning changes. It can be a separate article. Whether they go in that direction or not, I have no idea.
Speaking for myself, I don't think we should take a position on that. I think it's important to get these articles through town meeting. And with
I'm not
respect to issue, I don't know the nature of the opposition and I don't know how widespread it is, but I think that's a battle of itself.
yeah, I think
I mean,
our letter, yeah, go ahead.
curious procedurally, when you say to write a letter of support or whatever, does this mean we have an opportunity to look at that letter and its text or to me,
Yes.
it's a little fluffy or non-specific in terms of just sort of say, a blanket yes to something that for instance, I'm not intimately acquainted with the, you know, the particulars, and if it comes down to talking about individual properties, you know, I start to, is that where we're supposed to be? I don't know.
I think it would be, transportation related. A letter of support that the proposed zoning changes, you know, again, we can talk about the content of what it would be, but the proposed zoning changes, you know, maybe in our eyes or after discussion, do not pose any adverse effects in the transportation infrastructure of the town.
Well, it
I
should
mean-
cite the recent GPI traffic study.
Yeah.
Which indicates that there are some impacts, and I believe at the planning board, and Justin, you can confirm this. That, and maybe you can too, Tyler, 7 of the 9 intersections studied that need some improvements are already on DPW's list. I don't know the status of the other 2, but anyway, I think whatever letter is drafted, it should obviously be circulated to all of us. We would have an opportunity to comment, edit, so forth, and if anyone was uncomfortable with it, we'd have to reconsider.
Right.
I personally would much rather have unanimity as opposed to a majority vote on this. Just because I think it is a somewhat controversial issue, and I'm in favor of it. Don't get me wrong, though. I'm definitely in favor of it, and I can make my comment on that other issue separately. But I do think it should be circulated and approved by everyone.
I think it's more effective as a committee, as the MPCC, to opine and if I'm going on what I think people are saying, and perhaps there's something differently. The GPI study opine and say, yes, we agree with the GPI study that their study of the intersections said that there would be some effect. However, that effect was going to be background anyways. If there was a no build situation, the scenario that they came up with also is going to say that the traffic is going to be awful in certain intersections. You know, it's going to be an F and it's going to be D. And 7, just as James said, 7 of those 9 intersections are already in the roadmap for DPW to improve anyways. So the GPI study, to me and to others that read it, are saying that the traffic is going to get worse by 2035 anyways. It's only going to get marginally worse by the neighborhood scenario, which is the number 2 scenario. And that really is what I think my read of that study was. So to verify that and to come up with a committee to either agree or disagree, and obviously we can all opine and have our own thoughts, and this is something that we want to have a dialogue about. But I think that's going to be more effective rather than just having the MPC endorse the MBTA Communities Act. You know, this is what we do. We're a transportation-based committee, so we should opine on what our charge is.
I agree.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, I like the sound of that. Yeah, that's.
I'd like to suggest that the chair write a draft letter, circulate it to the committee. And our next meeting is on, you have that on your agenda.
Well, we're gonna have to talk about that.
So we can do that at the next meeting. That should be in time for town meeting.
Okay.
Can we not give feedback electronically, given open meeting stuff? Is that the
We'll have to
issue?
figure that out a little bit.
I think you can,
As long as it's not with the entire group.
you have to send it to the chair or to
Yeah.
Tyler, and then they can be
Oh,
circulated.
well, then let's do it that way, so we don't have to wait a full
Yeah.
month or
Just
more.
can't do it with each other. and-
Right, so all comments directly back to you.
When is town meeting?
October 21st.
Okay, so we would have had time either way, but. Well, depending
Yeah,
on,
when we reschedule, maybe we can reschedule for the first Monday of October.
right,
I will not be here. I don't think.
Yeah, so our normally scheduled meeting would be on the holiday. So we will,
Which holiday is that? Sorry.
Yom Kippur or Rosh
I should know.
Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples' Day, depending on your.
Okay,
Hashanah. Oh, that helped, yeah.
okay, thank you.
So I'm sorry, when is the next meeting?
16th is.
So we're determining that.
Okay.
We can do what we did before and I can give people a few options and vote, or we can decide. Now, whatever people feel is.
So is October 7th in the middle? And this is me, my kids are Jewish. My wife is Jewish. I'm not, but I know that there's a Jewish holiday in there.
No, I don't, I forget, I'm out of town.
Oh,
My kid's school is closed on the 3rd, so I think that's why.
Okay. Yes, 3rd of
Does
October.
that sound right? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'll be in North Carolina.
ooh.
Why don't we do a doodle poll?
Doodle.
Yeah, let's do that sooner rather than late, like, maybe like
That's
this
fine.
week if you have time.
Yeah, it's the, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Sukkot,
Sukkot, yes.
Sukkot
Scott, yeah.
Close enough.
is on October 7th, first day.
Um,
Well, if we do a doodle poll, maybe it'd be a different day than Monday and try to make it earlier than.
So I'll probably do like a couple dates that week and then a couple dates, the week that we would have met.
All right,
But if we get the letter back to you,
right,
I mean, it's. In the past, on some other committees I've been on, we have empowered the chair. To, or the town manager in some cases, to write. A letter expressing his sentiment that came out at the meeting. So to the extent that your draft does that, I think I would be comfortable.
I'm still gonna circulate.
Yeah, I would still
Yeah.
circulate. it,
No, no,
get feedback,
absolutely.
Finalize and then we authorize, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the.
All right. And,
So we'll have the same issue on in November, but we can discuss it next time.
next time, you'll review another doodle poll.
Or, yeah, we'll see.
It is another holiday.
Yeah,
Veterans Day.
but it's. We are, the town staff are off, but others might not be, so.
We don't want to cut into your.
It's also the day before my birthday. I
the
usually,
12th is your birthday?
the 13th, so
Oh,
I
okay.
usually take a long weekend.
Yep,
Then.
Nice.
you should take it.
Also,
FYI, the 15th of October is a planning board meeting.
Right, well,
Oh.
we're going to do that,
Do I-
that's the.
Do I have that? Oh, no, I do. I do actually, Alex, I do.
No, I'm just saying it's a proposed meeting date, so I don't know if,
That was the
And
meeting
that's the
that
one
we
we're not
would have
doing.
met.
no, it's a Tuesday.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just
Let's
saying
see in
that
chat.
Be a conflict for Justin.
the 14th is Indigenous Peoples' Day.
Oh,
The
you're
15th is
right.
a scheduled planning board meeting day, just as so much as you need
So
Justin.
that was my fault, cause that should
I
have
am,
said
see,
October 14th.
that was one of the reasons I relegated chair to Tim is I am actually not needed. I may be wanted. but I'm not.
You guys can meet without us.
okay,
Well, I'll see it in your doodle poll
Yeah.
answers.
Yes.
So do it for, well, both months at the same time, maybe, I don't know,
You do.
if people know
Yeah.
their schedules that far ahead, I
You
don't.
can do a doodle poll and then.
okay. And I'll entertain a motion to. adjourn.
So actually, Tim, just before you have a motion, I actually wanted to. So Gus is in the room there. Gus Jurison. He is a member of the TSC and has been for over a year. One of the more valued members of the team. He's a resident, and I have recommended to the select board that he be the representative of the Transportation Safety Committee to the MPCC. I have been moved officially to the planning board appointee, opening up the ability for Gus to be on the MPCC. He should have been at the table tonight. Unfortunately, we don't meet until Wednesday, where we will, officially vote and rubber stamp And then it goes to the select board after that for final approval. But nonetheless, I wanted everyone to welcome Gus. He is his experience in Brookline as traffic engineering, and he's just a wealth of information, and he will be a great asset to the MPCC. So just wanted to
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, I spoke with Gus, and definitely some projects in Brookline that we've talked about that will be good for us here, so. So we good.
Thank you for those kind of welcoming words.
Sorry, I had to sit through a 2-hour meeting.
They're not one of them has been, less than
We've
an
just been
hour
so
yet.
busy.
Yeah. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I
now.
will make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, the chair votes aye. Justin,
Aye.
Duncan,
Aye.
Mo,
I
Jim,
Aye.
meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay, take
Thank you,
care
everybody.
all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
How you
Have a
doing,
good
Alex?
evening.
How are you?